You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. A musical retrospective turns the spotlight on the individuals and personalities that help shape our vibrant classical music scene here in Winnipeg. Presented by Sid Rabinovich and James Manishen. Jim has joined me in the Classic 107 studio to tell us a little bit more. Welcome here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Simon. You and I are used to talking at the concert hall. So here I'm in the new Classic 107 studios, and it's a different environment for me.
I was going to say, I'm so used to you joining us outside of Portal 15 with the WSO accompanying us, but thrilled that you've taken the time to pop by here and to chat more about this show. So as we've heard over the years on Classic from the Concert Hall, your knowledge of classical music and beyond is expansive, and I always find myself learning something new each time we chat. And I'm sure that's going to be doubly the case for this upcoming program, which features Jewish Winnipeggers and their contributions to the classical scene. So, James, I'm curious, first off, what inspired this program?
Well, it actually started with John Einerson. And you know, John is one of the great experts on Winnipeg rock and pop. And 3 years ago, he came out with a book, a terrific book called Heart of Gold, The History of Winnipeg Music. And full disclosure, I helped him a little bit with the classical side, but it's a terrific book, and it's loaded with the most interesting photographs. And, you know, when you look through it, you say to yourself, well, are we ever lucky to live here? I like to think of Winnipeg not as a cultural mecca west of Toronto, but maybe the culture mecca, and I'm sure I'm not alone. So John did a presentation for the Jewish Heritage Society of Western Canada, and it was so well received, somebody suggested maybe they should look at the classical side of things too. So last year, Sid Rabinovich, who was tapped, he's a well-known composer, he uses Jewish materials in his music. He said, would you like to maybe talk about some of the other individuals? So I said, sure, I'd like to go back. This was the time of my youth and people that I associated with way back from the 50s as a student on upwards. And we put together a program Thursday evening at the Bernie Theatre, 7 p.m., free admission. And I think people will enjoy it.
I think so, too. And I'm curious, you mentioned, this is maybe some individuals that take you back to your youth, but I was curious about the date range. Are these current individuals? Are they from the recent past, or do they stretch right back to the early days of the city?
Well, they go right back to the early days, because this was a time back then when the population of Winnipeg was half of what it is today, but the size of the Jewish community was double what it is today, so that the ratio was much greater back then. And Jewish families always regarded culture as something very important, and many of them were immigrants from Europe, so they brought that regard for culture with them. And there are a lot of musicians that came out of here. I'm going to be profiling about a dozen of them, all except for one I had personal contact with. So I thought the best way to talk about them is through some stories that I had in my meetings with them. I'm going to start with an apology for names that we have missed. So many names, so little time, but c'est la vie. And I have some audio and some slides because, you know, you're talking about music, you have to hear them play.
You do.
So fortunately, I've been able to come up with some things. Some of them is pretty rare.
It sounds totally fascinating and almost like this little time capsule, right? And highlighting, especially being able to hear some of these players perform. I was curious about how this kind of became structured in terms of the program. You mentioned you're going to be profiling the musicians. I would imagine then Sid Rabinovich is going to be kind of highlighting some of the composers, perhaps? Did you divide it up in that sort of structured way?
Yes. Well, Sid is our most distinguished Manitoba Jewish composer.
He certainly is.
So he's going to talk a little bit about, from his perspective, how you compose. He's going to play some excerpts of his own work and talk a little bit about the range of his work, which has been extensive over the years. I'll deal with some composers, too, who are from Winnipeg, but mostly my focus are people that I knew, with one exception. I can give you a little bit of a teaser.
I was going to say, would you mind dropping a few names without giving too much away?
Let's... I'll mention the one that I didn't know, although I knew many people that worked with him, and that is Walter Kaufman.
Ah, yes, of course.
And Walter Kaufman was the first conductor of the newly incorporated Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra in 1947. But a lot of people don't know his background. His background is fascinating. He was a Czech-born Jew. He was a friend of Albert Einstein. His wife was the niece of Franz Kafka. And he was a conducting associate of Bruno Walter. And in Hitler's Germany, he had to leave, of course, so he ended up in India. And he had a friend in India who was involved in the burgeoning film industry there. So he told Walter that they needed composers, they needed music directors, and he got him a job. So Walter went to India at that time. And when he was in India, he met up with Meli Mehta. And Mele Mehta was the father of Zubin, the conductor, Zubin Mehta. And it's thought that Walter gave him lessons in harmony. It's a very interesting connection.
No kidding.
So while he was in India, Walter composed music for the films there, and he connected up with All India Radio and the Chamber Music Society there. Became quite well known.
Yeah. Still heard, I believe one of his tunes was used at least by BBC for a long time in India as well.
Yes, the opening and the sign-off.
Exactly,
are still used. And I don't have to tell you, there are millions of listeners to that
certainly.
will know. So Walter, after 12 years, contracted malaria. And his doctor there suggested he go to a temperate climate. So he went to London. And he got a similar job with the Arthur Rank Film Studios, but he really wanted to come to North America. So he managed to do so. He got to Halifax, where he taught piano at the Halifax Conservatory. And in those days, the conservatory system was kind of regulated by a principal, and that was Ernest Macmillan. And through Ernest Macmillan, Walter got to Winnipeg in 1947, and he was very well respected, well liked. It was a really good time, his 9 years here.
I really started to dive into his music. There was a great recording that came out with the Arc Ensemble a few years back, and we got to chat with them about kind of highlighting his chamber music. And I mean, just a very fascinating individual, and I mean, just that tight connection to Winnipeg. I can only imagine the amount of research that's gone into this, James, just given that little overview you've given us on Walter Kaufman and his connection to the community here. So excited to hear more about these 11 other individuals who'll be featured. And again, I certainly appreciate it. I'm sure the audience does as well, that disclaimer that comes with, we had to miss a few people, didn't we?
Well, I have to say that we're going to have a Q&A after. We've timed in, from what I've been told, that the Q&A gets pretty lively. So that's the time for the audience to...
What about this person, James? Why not them?
Why not? Well, what that says to me is maybe we can have a sequel.
Yes, of course. I mean, there's just so much opportunity here. Now, you mentioned in terms of kind of the structure of the event itself, you're going to be chatting, sharing some slides, some audio recordings. Will there also be some music that's shared as well, some players joining you?
No, we found that we have so much content.
Oh, wow.
that we didn't want to shortchange the players by not giving them enough time. But I can tell you what there will be is compliments of the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. There are 3 door prizes, which we will draw for. Then there are refreshments afterwards, a chat session, Q&A. And the best thing of all, it's absolutely free.
$0. Thursday,
Just come.
7 p.m. And a little reception too, a little Q&A, some snacks perhaps.
Yes.
Talk about a wonderful evening, and certainly one that's going to shine the spotlight on a very vibrant community, an active part of the community since, well, Winnipeg's founding and right up to the present day. This certainly sounds like it's going to be most fascinating indeed. Jewish personalities in Winnipeg's classical music scene, taking place at the Bernie Theatre, the Rady JCC. Again, a free event, 7 p.m. James, thanks for joining me to tell us about
Simon.
it. Always wonderful to see you.